Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on the tourism sector. This as we are approaching the summer season, and definitely we're going to be looking at the tourism sector, the prospects for the remaining of 2023. Now, for the second half of 2022, the tourism revenues have jumped to $7.3 billion. We're going to be focusing on the tourism sector tonight, but before we do that, let's check out some of the main stories making the news today. And we'll start off with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who received today the General Tatqiu Gatluak, the security advisor to South Sudan's president. The meeting was attended by General Intelligence Chief Lieutenant Abbas Kamel. During the meeting, the South Sudanese security advisor handed President el-Sisi a message from President Salva Kiir. The meeting tackled means of boosting bilateral ties and the latest developments in Sudan. It also centered on ongoing efforts to settle the crisis and the security of the Sudanese people, as well as humanitarian and political challenges to the country. Both sides stressed on the significance of urging Sudanese sides to keep the truce and moving to a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. They reiterated that permanent ceasefire would allow humanitarian aid into the country and open the path for a constructive dialogue to settle the crisis and continue with the transitional path and the political process to keep the unity of Sudan. And Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli witnessed the signing of strategic framework between Egypt and the United Nations today. The partnership framework is signed from the Egyptian side by Minister of International Cooperation Rania Mashad and the resident representative of the United Nations in Egypt, Elena Panova. Addressing the ceremony, Premier Madbouli said Egypt achieved great development in facing global challenges. The Prime Minister noted that the government prioritizes quick procedures to boost economic development. The Prime Minister noted that the government prioritizes quick procedures to boost the economic development, and for her part, Minister Mashad said the signing ushers a new strategic stage of mutual cooperation between Egypt and the UN, one of the biggest international organizations. The minister confirmed that her ministry is keen to tackle its national role regarding the enhancement of benefiting chances from the international strategy between Egypt and the United Nations. The framework organizes the development projects which the UN agencies operating in Egypt implement in accordance with the priorities of Egypt's government and its National Plan for Sustainable Development 2030. These projects come in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. Both sides co-chair the Joint Steering Committee of the Strategic Framework of Partnership between Egypt and the United Nations for Sustainable Development. And Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry visited Juba to convey a message from President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to South Sudan's President Salva Kiir on the situation in Sudan. This came after wrapping up his visit to Chad's capital, N'Djamena. During his visit to Chad, the top diplomat delivered a message from President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to the Chadian President Mohammed Idris Deby. During his meeting with the Chadian President, Shoukry reviewed Egypt's efforts since the start of Sudan's crisis, with the two struggling sides to reach a ceasefire. He pointed that Egypt has received more than 60,000 of the Sudanese fleeing from military confrontations. The two sides agreed on the necessity of continuing joint coordination to solve the crisis and keep the unity and safety of Sudan. These were some of the main stories making the news today, but now turning our attention to tonight's topic and tonight's focus on the tourism sector. Let's check out this report regarding Egypt trying to boost the tourism sector for the past few years and ahead of the summer season as well. Let's check it out and we'll be right back.
Minister of Tourism Mohammed revealed that the government is working on a strategy to boost growth of tourism, stressing significance of the national plan to develop tourism, a key in the national economy. In this regard, the minister highlighted increase in the number of flights to and from Egypt as part of the project to increase number of visitors. He called to empower domestic tourism companies, operators, guides and other stakeholders in the sector. The minister revealed that the country expects to receive 15 million visitors in 2023, a year-on-year growth of 28%. He also explained that the entry of tourists in January and February increased by 35%. At the beginning of the year, the Fitch rating agency estimated that more than 52 million people will arrive in Egypt in the next 4 years. According to the analysis, some 11.5 million visitors will arrive in 2023, a number that will increase to 13 million in 2024, 13.5 million in 2025, 14 million in 2026. Fitch Solutions expects an increase in the number of tourists coming to Egypt in 2023 and up to 2026 in a way that will increase tourism proceeds and hotel occupancy rates. The agency expects the number of tourists who will visit Egypt in 2023 to reach 11.6 million tourists against 7.9 million in 2022. It said that Egypt enjoys a distinguished geographic location in addition to different types of tourism, and expected that Egypt's tourism revenues would increase by 17.7% to hit $13.6 billion in 2023. It said tourism revenues are expected to reach $17.9 billion by the end of 2026. Standard & Poor's expects the sector to recover fully during the current year, although the decrease in the number of tourists from Russia and Ukraine is offset by the increase in tourists from Germany, England, America and Saudi Arabia. Minister of Planning and Economic Development Al Said recently informed that the government will invest almost $300 million in tourism in the fiscal year 2022-2023. She pointed out that the number of tourists increased from 3.7 million in 2022, a year marked by COVID-19 pandemic, to 8 million in 2021, while income grew from $4.1 billion to $9 billion respectively.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here tonight in the studio by Dr. Wessam Mohammed, the researcher at the Department of Archaeology, Aarhus University in Denmark. Dr. Mohammed, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the kind invitation.
Dr. Mohammed, first of all, now when we talk about the tourism sector in Egypt, it's well documented that it's one of the main pillars of the Egyptian economy, a main source of foreign currency. Obviously, the whole world, Egypt included, has gone through a lot of hardships because of the coronavirus pandemic, for instance, also the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, inflation, a lot of economic crises hitting the whole world. And as a result, the tourism sector has been affected, and each and every country is trying to boost its own sector. Now, you've been in Denmark for a while and you've been researching the tourism industry in general. How would you describe or assess the performance of the Egyptian government in trying to boost the tourism sector here in Egypt, keeping in mind how important it is for our economy?
Yes, of course, the tourism is very important to Egypt as one of the 4 pillars, as you said, for the economy. But I'm going to go back before COVID.
Yes.
Let's go back to 2011.
Definitely.
With the revolution and everyone talking about the security in Egypt. I remember days when we had no tourism at all. I used to work at the Grand Egyptian Museum, but by that time, of course, my colleagues at the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities working everywhere, we were suffering from this period that we had nothing at all. Of course, the positive thing we had after this, that we could work more on the Egyptian community. But talking about economy, of course, the international tourism is more important than internal tourism, somehow, let's say. Tourism is really important because people not only coming here for like leisure time, they pay money for accommodation, for hotels, for transportation, for a lot of things. People working directly with tourism, getting the benefits, but also people who work indirectly with tourism get some benefits, like in transportation, for example, restaurants. Those are not touristic destinations, but they benefit from this. Retails, for example. The Egyptian government worked since, let's say, 2015-14 on the development and enhancing the tourism destination and museums and sites. And I can say that I was part of the renovation of 6 museums from 2015 and 2017. And my colleagues continued, of course, this work till that time. We had new museums opened. Some of them are in remote areas or touristic destinations like Sharm el-Sheikh Museum or Hurghada Museum. Some museums have been renovated here in Cairo and other places. Malawi Museum, for example, was opened again after being attacked by terrorists. Enhancing heritage sites and archaeological sites also gain some benefits from this, because tourism is like 2 ways. When we work on tourism, enhancing tourism means that we enhance and preserve our cultural heritage sites, and we preserve it to the future generations. And in the same time, when we do this, we enhance tourism. We bring more tourists to Egypt. Of course, the efforts of the Egyptian government is starting to get the revenue of the results, because now we can see that there are a huge increase in the number of tourism and the number of tourists in Cairo and other cities like Luxor, for example, Aswan. Yeah, we can say that the Egyptian government is working very well on this. Even during COVID lockdown, Egypt was one of the very few tourist destinations in the world that, I mean, we received tourism during COVID lockdown.
Yes. Well, let's take it bit by bit. You've mentioned museums, and obviously Egypt is known for its cultural tourism, and it's known for the artifacts and all the pharaonic civilization, also a lot of Greek artifacts and Romans, and all of this sort of treasure. Now, we've opened a lot of museums, as you've mentioned, in different governorates, even in places like Sharm el-Sheikh, where it is usually known to be a beach tourism destination. Do you feel that it does make a difference in terms of at least revenue when tourists not just go for certain destinations by the Red Sea or the North Coast and just check out the beaches and the hotels and the sea activities and everything, the beach activities, but also having a chance to go to different museums? Does it make a difference for the international tourists when they start booking their place in their own country?
Yes, of course, I can say this. Egypt has a lot to offer. I think people used to focus on the pharaonic Egyptian culture, if we can say this, like the ancient Egyptian past.
Yes.
But as you said, we have the Islamic culture, we have Roman artifacts or heritage, we have Greek heritage. The Coptic art is very important, but also there are a lot of things that we can see other than artifacts or historical tourism. Going to beaches or resorts, as I told you, I was yesterday in Dahab. There are a lot of people there enjoying hiking, diving, kite surfing, a lot of things to make there. But what we want to, let's say, to sell, that we need to sell the experience itself.
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you that you're coming to Egypt to see the pyramids. Of course you're going to see the pyramids, but I can tell you how you're going to feel when you see the pyramids. What will you eat? What cultural experiences are waiting for you? This is creating memories. These memories that you will take back home when you travel from Egypt. And this is what you're going to talk about with your families and friends. And at the same time, this will bring us more visitors to Egypt.
Yes.
We still have a lot to offer. Of course, there are a lot of, or many cities in Egypt that doesn't really receive the tourism that it deserves. El-Menia, for example, El-Menia
Yes.
governorate has a lot of things to see, but we still focus on other destinations like Luxor, Aswan. Of course, we still have time to do this because we suffered a lot from colonial policies since so many years, hundreds of years suffering from colonialism, and now Egypt is taking care again of its heritage, and we need a lot of time and efforts
Yes.
to reach good results.
Well, before we start talking about creating this sort of experience within the tourism industry, now a very much anticipated inauguration and opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum, looking at the Giza and the Pyramids Plateau. Now, how much is it? I mean, we know a lot about it. Everyone in Egypt is anticipating it, but also around the world now. You've been in Denmark, for instance, for a while now. Is it very much anticipated, the inauguration of this museum? How do you think it will change the dynamics of the industry opening such a gigantic project and a gigantic museum?
Yes, and I can tell you that everyone is talking about this, not only in Denmark, but when we travel to attend conferences in other countries, people ask about the Grand Museum. They are waiting for this. I'm not telling you about the industry itself, but at least I'm going to tell you that I live around the pyramids. My family is coming from this area, and everyone in this place is waiting for this museum because they want to connect to the museum somehow. So it will start by enhancing the local community around this area, people who live there, people who work with the industry. Of course, many people also are trying to create more opportunities in the heritage industry by creating, let's say, or starting small projects related to heritage, but also on the international map of museums. We have the Cairo Museum as the main museum in Egypt, and this is very, very valuable among other museums. But talking about the space and the facilities, I always say that the Grand Museum is not only a museum, but it's a complex. It's a museum complex with a lot of spaces dedicated to different or a variety of cultural experiences. So people going there will not only watch the display, but the way of creating meaningful interpretation, how to understand the logics of Egypt's heritage. It's not about the kings, the queens, the golden stuff, but also about the people of Egypt, how they lived in the past, how we create connection with them as people or Egyptians of today, just to make, let's say, some justifications against what
and
we
make it more
hear
relatable.
about. Yes, exactly.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're also joined now over the phone by Dr. Sameh Saad, the tourism expert and the senior advisor to the former Minister of Tourism. Dr. Saad, good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm very well. Dr. Saad, now, first off, I mean, we are approaching the summer season, and Egypt has been really trying to and working on developing the tourism sector. We've recorded an increase in revenue for the second half of 2022. What about 2023? How far is it so far? We are almost done with half of the year. How would you evaluate the performance of the tourism sector in Egypt?
I am evaluating now, touch wood, of course, we say, that the tourism will increase. I hope this year we'll reach 15 million, as Minister of Tourism announced earlier, His Excellency. So, yes, I see a demand. I see the problem next year. We don't have enough rooms in Luxor and Aswan, which they were always suffering from lack of clients. So I see that we have a good year in front of us.
Well, we were talking about the inauguration of the Grand Egyptian Museum due later this year. Now, are you receiving any sort of bookings or reservations anticipating the inauguration of this museum. How do you view it within the industry? How is it anticipated? Are we getting more bookings? Are we getting more flights? Are there different countries as opposed to our usual customers coming to Egypt?
We receive inquiries all the time about the museum and about the booking a space, about booking a program. But since the museum was delayed different times,
yes,
several times as well, we don't confirm any booking. But I'm sure once it's confirmed 100%, it will be a big attraction to Egypt and the tourism.
Yes. Dr. Saad, now, last year we were talking about maybe international tourists are reluctant to travel around a lot because of the economic crises, the inflation that was caused by the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Now we are in the second year of such a conflict. Do you feel that people are adapting to the already existing conflict and they will be moving around much more freely?
People realize that this war is there since over a year now, and there's nothing is happening. I mean, life go as it is. So they don't care, because we receive the bookings from different nationalities worldwide. We receive from Americans, we receive from Europeans, and they don't consider at all this what's happening with the war. Yes, but there are some missing items in the food, like the cooking oil and stuff like this. But I don't see any influence about the war except the prices went high.
Dr. Sameh Saad.
And we still receive a lot of demands, and the hotels are raising the prices, but still it's doing well.
Yes. Dr. Sameh Saad, the tourism expert and senior advisor to the former Minister of Tourism, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Now, Dr. Mohammed, you were talking about the Grand Egyptian Museum, and you lived around the Giza Plateau.
Yeah.
Now, the government has been doing a lot of infrastructure work, trying to change the course of traffic, making the streets wider, working on more newer developed metro lines. And this is not just in the Giza Plateau, it's all around Cairo and in different governorates as well around the country, be it in Alexandria, be it sometimes even in Minya, and sometimes a lot of renovation work. Now, how much do you feel the government, in terms of infrastructure work, trying to make it easier to move around the country and maybe having more flights, more airports, be it from the north coast to Luxor and Aswan, having one-day sort of trips back and forth? Do you feel that these efforts are enough to boost the tourism industry, or do we still need more?
Well, I can say that today more than ever we have a lot of infrastructure projects done by the government, and of course for tourists this is very important, because for someone who's visiting Egypt for the first time, of course they need to have information about how to move from one point to another, where to go and what transportation to use. Of course, enhancing the roads and highways between cities also is very important. Today we have enhanced highways between Cairo and Sinai and other governorates from the Nile Delta to Upper Egypt. This is really important for tourism. And because everything is connected, we do this, which is very important to tourism, but also this creates more job opportunities for people. And when we have all of this done, we enhance tourism, and we have also opportunities to attract more investment in the heritage industry. So it's so really connected, and I can say that we didn't have this before. I mean, we are reaching very good levels of development in infrastructure. I can see the government working also in other places and other projects. For example, we have in the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities projects related to enhancing the physical accessibility for visitors with special needs. For example, like in 2019, I think Karnak temples was announced as one of the temples of Egypt that's accessible for people with special needs by creating ramps, making floor-friendly routes for people to use.
Yes.
And this is facilitating the visiting experiences, but also attracting more visitors who can get the information about these services that they can use.
Well, you mentioned a very good and important point, which is making the trip or the visit much more about the experience, making it relatable to the tourists and not just watching different monuments and artifacts and knowing about the kings and queens and pyramids. So how do we actually do that? Is it something that, for instance, museums need to do in terms of development of their exhibitions, or is it something related to the personnel working at the museums and at the touristic sites having to really develop the tourism culture within the personnel working within the industry? How do we go about it and trying to make it relatable? Or is it something that maybe we need to work on in different countries so people have some sort of an anticipation before coming to Egypt?
Well, if I talk about my colleagues at the ministry or myself, because I used to work there since 2010, we started to do this right after the revolution because as I told you before, in 2011 we had no tourism and we started to think, okay, where are all the Egyptians? From that point, we realized that we have to do something for Egypt, for the Egyptian people. And we started to recreate our exhibitions, recreate the interpretation in our museums, because all of this has started by foreigners and for the entertainment of foreigners. We didn't have archaeologists in the past that are allowed to do this because Egypt was colonized. And today we are changing all of this. But there is one point that I want to discuss here, that we still need the private sector. We, as the government of Egypt, if I'm talking like someone from the ministry, yes, we are doing a lot of work, but also there are a lot of things that we can do as the people of Egypt, as the private sector. For example, if we're talking about the international tourism, do you know what's the very first thing that Arab tourists coming from, let's say, the Gulf countries think about when they come to Egypt? The Egyptian people. They feel very happy because we speak Egyptian accent. This is very normal and natural for us, but for them, this is heritage, this is tourism. They want to see posters for the Egyptian actors, for example. So just imagine if we have one museum dedicated to cinema, one museum dedicated to the costumes of Egyptian today, because heritage is not only the past, but the current day, the present. This is also part of our heritage. And I encourage my colleagues and my students and myself to support the private projects, such as new museums, new projects, new creative ideas, new technology projects related to heritage and tourism, because this will boost the economy of Egypt even more than what we have at the government, because we can work together. Also, we have a lot of institutions here in Egypt, foreign institutions working in Egyptology. That's because, of course, Egyptology is very worldwide, if you can say. And there are a lot of cooperation with other countries. For example, I think we had a few months ago a twinning agreement between Luxor and Petra as two World Heritage Sites. And this kind of cooperation is making the Egyptian heritage industry is very strong, and also sending a lot of messages to the international community that Egypt is safe again. And I think this is very important to the image of Egypt.
Yes. Well, the security and safety situation has been high in Egypt's agenda, and Egypt is definitely quite a safe and secure place now, as opposed to a few years ago when it was pretty turbulent. But now it's very safe, it's very secure. And you've mentioned the importance of the private sector. which is something that has been, I mean, the sector was hard hit, especially after the 2011 revolution. A lot of the travel agencies, all the tourism companies, most of them shut down, and people who were working within the industry just shut down their companies. However, bit by bit, they are back again, and we are seeing quite a strong Egyptian presence within all the international exhibitions, the ones in the UAE, the ones in Germany.
Yes.
We've seen it, I mean, month in, month out. So how much do you feel the industry or the private sector, how much of a burden does it really, I mean, because we keep on mentioning the governmental efforts, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, but this is a service industry which needs a lot of money, needs a lot of luxury as well. How much of the burden and of the cake should the private sector have in Egypt?
If you mean how much the private sector needs support?
Yeah, should invest and support and start their own projects, and as you've mentioned, for instance, try and have and establish a museum for cinema, for instance.
Yes, I think there are a lot of ideas, but we need something like project management in archaeology, heritage, museums, and I keep talking about this with my colleagues at different universities in Egypt, that we have to teach this at university. Yes, I can study archaeology, but I need to know, what if I don't work at the ministry? What if I want to have my own project? How to run this project? How to manage the project? How to turn my idea to a successful business? This support comes from the universities at first, and then from the government to support new projects. I'm not sure if they can give funding for this, but at least they can give the learning or the knowledge that we need. And I know that the Ministry of Investment is doing this with some of their programs, but we just need to market these ideas, to talk about this, to give the knowledge to the people, and especially people who studied like heritage management or archaeology or museum management, just to tell them that, okay, now you can go on your own to support the industry and to have your own project. You don't have to be an employee of other institution. From this point, because I'm talking about this because there are some trends in tourism that we need to learn about in Egypt. For example, the trend of responsible tourism or ethical tourism. People are talking about this abroad because they want to go to countries like Egypt to support the locals. So I'm not going to book my room, for example, in a luxurious hotel as one of the international brands, for example.
Yes.
So the rich can go richer, you know. No, I'm going to book my hotel in a very local hotel, support local businesses, like buying souvenirs from local shops. So Egypt as a country can get the benefits of tourism. And this is a very strong point if we can enhance or boost or talk to the people that, yes, you can do this. You can come to Egypt for ethical tourism. So it's not only cultural, but also ethical.
Yes.
And this is something that makes the experience difference.
Yes, definitely. Ladies and gentlemen, for the second half of 2022, the revenues from the tourism industry jumped to $7.3 billion, and it is expected to rise even more in 2023. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Egypt's revenues from tourism jumped by 25.7% during the second half of 2022 to record $7.3 billion, according to the Central Bank of Egypt, CBE, which attributed the hike in tourism revenues to the increase in the number of tourist nights by 27.2% on an annual basis to record about 78.4 million nights, and the increase in the number of tourists coming to Egypt by 27.5% to reach about 6.8 million tourists. The government had announced that the tourism sector would be included in the initiative to support productive sectors, which currently includes the industrial and agricultural sectors, and allocated £10 billion for it, bringing the total financing made available through the initiative to £160 billion, which helps increase the volume of its business and expand its business work and production. The initiative stipulates that government supports interest on financing so that loans are within the initiative at an interest rate of 11%, and the public treasury bears the difference. The initiative aims to finance working capital for productive sectors at a value of £150 billion, with £140 billion for working capital and £10 billion for tools. Egypt's tourist numbers witnessed an overall growth of 33% from the start of the year to April 2023. Egypt is targeting 15 million tourists in 2023. The improvement in tourism revenues is due to the increase in the number of tourist nights by 27.2% on an annual basis to record about 78.4 million nights, and the increase in the number of tourists coming to Egypt by 27.5% to reach about 6.8 million tourists. Prime Minister has emphasized that Egypt's commitment to achieving the new budget targets, especially reaching an initial surplus of GDP and reducing the budget deficit in line with the planned ratios, while expanding the social safety net and addressing the effects of economic challenges. Earlier this year, the cabinet announced the tourism sector would be included in the initiative to support the productive sectors, which currently includes the industrial and agricultural sectors, and allocated £10 billion for it, bringing the total investment made available through the initiative to £160 billion. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli affirmed the government's commitment to work towards achieving the targets of the new budget, especially with regard to reaching a primary surplus of the gross domestic product, reducing the budget deficit according to the planned proportions, while expanding the social protection network and dealing with the effects of economic challenges. Minister of Finance stated that the new budget aims for the primary surplus to reach 2.5% of the GDP, with a total deficit rate of about 6.37%, pointing out that the next budget will witness an increase in allocations for support and social protection from £358.4 billion to £529.7 billion in implementation of the directives of President Fattah el-Sisi, with the aim of mitigating the effects of the global inflation wave on citizens.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Mohammed. Now, Doctor, you've mentioned, for instance, the marketing aspect, which is really how you promote Egypt as a destination, how you sell the idea to a foreign tourist to come to Egypt, which is really how you get the tourists to come. And over the past few years, we've seen the dominance of social media in terms of marketing tourism, all the hashtags, maybe inviting certain celebrities to come to Egypt, giving them great experiences around the touristic destinations we have here. Now, is this the main way now, instead of just going and attending exhibitions or travel tourism exhibitions around the world, is this one of the strongest and main tools now? And how can we try and keep up with continually updating and progressing social media campaigning, not just for Egypt, but the whole world is doing that?
Well, social media is the most watched, let's say, marketing trend, and it's mostly very cheap, or at least free of charge sometimes, and everyone has his phone in his hand and can watch what you post, for example. But the thing about social media that it has some positive impact and some negative impact. Because sometimes when just a small thing happens, then you can see it on social media everywhere, and this of course destroys the images of tourism in Egypt. But talking about marketing Egypt as a name of a country, we don't have to work on marketing to market the name of Egypt. Everyone knows Egypt and what they can see there. Sometimes there are people more interested to visit Egypt more than others, like the Chinese, for example. Every time they hear the name of Egypt, they feel very happy that, oh, Egypt. So it's not like we don't have to work on marketing, but I'm saying that, yes, Egypt is very well known. But the good marketing for this is to work on the services, to tell the people that I have services that will facilitate your visits. So when you come to Egypt, you can do this and go there and see a lot of things. It's not only that you're going to visit normal tourist destination. We see sometimes people going to some international cities, like in Europe, for example, and get disappointed because, okay, this is not what we saw on social media. And what we need to do here in Egypt is to work on this. In my opinion, this is one of the strategies, that to tell the people that this is what you see on social media and this is what we have in Egypt in real life. To sell the services, to sell the experiences, to tell the people that it's more than a visit. Yes, social media, of course, is very important, but as we were talking about the nearby markets, for example, we have a competition now in the Middle East with some countries. I'm not going to mention projects, but of course they have a lot of excellent projects in different countries, not only in the Middle East, but in other tourist destinations. But you have to give the tourists what they need to come here and to choose Egypt more than other places. Some people work on, let's say, the bucket list destinations. Some people like to go visit luxurious places. So you have to have some strategies to attract every type of visitors, not only this, but also that. Of course, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has the major work on this, or the major part of work, like thinking of strategies to attract more visitors, to play well in the competition, if you can say this. But also the people of Egypt has to learn that this is very important to us, that even if I'm not working on the tourism, if I don't work for a hotel or a restaurant or something like this, but I still know that tourism is very important for my country, and I have to act well with tourists, if I can say this.
Yes. Well, you've been involved and you've been working within the tourism industry for quite some time now, and it is going through its own changes and its own development in terms of, I mean, having the standard traditional travel agencies and travel companies and everything. And now we're seeing a lot of people freelancing their work within the tourism industry. A lot of tour guides are working independently. A lot of Egyptian citizens are offering their own apartments or their own some rooms in their flats through different websites at a much lower cost than the traditional hotels, be it 7 stars or 2 or 3 stars, which really, does it really affect the revenues coming to the tourism industry officially, or it doesn't really make much of a difference? And if it does make a difference, is there a way for the private sector, the travel companies and the travel agencies, having some sort of deals or contracts with the freelancers to try and merge and try to boost each other's work so it's a win-win situation for all?
Yes, but I think we need to understand that freelancing is a fact. It's everywhere in the world, and a lot of people are doing this, and this is also kind of employment for the people. So if I have something like this, it means that I have a job, even if it's not an official job, but it is a job somehow. Sometimes we need to include freelancers with other agencies, like tourism agencies, for example, as you mentioned. And this is important to, let's say, integrate the funds somehow between both of them. But I think freelancers don't really get a lot of the economies of tourism away. It's just partly.
Yes.
So I don't think it will affect the income of the tourism, let's say, in a bad way.
Yes.
But meantime, they can also be part of it, like having, as I mentioned before, some strategies dedicated to some people. Like, for example, why can't we just understand that some people don't really like to go to hotels? They prefer Airbnb. They don't really want to go to a travel agency to get a tour guide. They want to go on their own. So we have to have some strategies and some services to all kind of tourists. So maybe someone who doesn't like this, he will get the other service. And from the other side, we can also create other projects. Sometimes it's big projects, sometimes small projects, but projects to include all of this. I mean, if we're talking about freelancers, why we can't have an online platform, for example, to connect all the freelancers together?
Yes.
Then the freelancer will get some work, and also the agency or the website will get some of the benefits.
Yes.
So we can share all the benefits together.
And that's something that the country is actually encouraging, the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, the startups, the entrepreneurship, and the tourism sector definitely would make use of such vision. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you've just heard from Dr. Mohammed, there's a lot of potential for development and progress for the tourism sector. A lot has happened already over the past few years, but still a lot more need to be done to be able to stave off all the sort of competition we have in the tourism industry. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Dr. Wessam Mohammed, the researcher at the Department of Archaeology at Aarhus University in Denmark. Dr. Mohammed, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you.
It's a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Night International. I'm Henny Say. Thanks for joining us.